right. So, hey guys, I got my buddy Matt here today. We're going to continue talking about the hot topic of the last couple of weeks, just about racism and how it's affecting society and things of that sort. So, just want to welcome my buddy Matt. Matt, how's it going today? How's everything going?
Going real well, Corey.
All right, good stuff, good stuff. So, hopefully, you guys had a happy holiday and everything. So, now we get to ask you 1,000 questions.
Bring it on, man. I'm excited.
But yeah, so in general, I guess just to start things off, how are you feeling about everything going on, or how's it has it affected you anyway, or has it, how are things going overall? I guess dealing with everything.
It's a very interesting time, right? To be seeing all this stuff. I think it's been building up for a long time. And I think if we didn't have the advent of everyone having their smartphone and videoing these things and then putting them out on social media, we wouldn't be drawing nearly as much attention to it. So since like 2007 or 2008 when smartphones came out, this stuff's been going on for a long time. But I think it's been building up and building up much more dramatically over the last 10, 12 years because of the advent of smartphones. So it for me, it's an exercise in awareness, right? There's so much of the stuff that I wasn't aware of. Mainstream media doesn't necessarily put it in the news. So having social media and having everybody with a smartphone turning it on and recording things, basically turning into a reporter. It brings a lot more awareness. So how it affects me is it just makes me a lot more aware because I've never been a black person. I haven't had to walk a mile. Like you said, as good of friends as we are, and as well as we relate to each other, I've never had to walk a mile in your shoes. So, my experience with it is very different. So,
Sure,
I'm,
sure,
I'm actually glad for all the awareness that this is providing. It's very educational for me.
sure. No, absolutely. And I'll say too, and I'm probably sound like a broken record now, but on the other interviews that I've done, I've pretty much said the same thing. Is that I am truly shocked that the amount of racism that's going on. Like I said, I knew about it a little bit just from the interactions and the experiences I've had, but I didn't know it was to this degree. I mean, as you're seeing all these videos come out of people, like you said, being reporters, it's like, wow, people are really, really messed up. And I didn't realize they were that like hateful and this, that, and the other. So it's very eye opening, I guess, to say the least. Um, how do you feel about what's going on right now, just as a white man? I mean, I know you kind of touched on that a little bit, but you said that there's more awareness, I guess, with how you're seeing the world and everything.
Yeah. I've never really thought of it in the context of of white privilege, right? I've never thought about or if I've thought very little about how my experience is different on a day-to-day basis, doing random things, right? Walking down the street at a certain time of day or in a certain place, how that would experience would be different for a person of color or a minority.
Yeah.
So I've never had to be like afraid when a cop pulls me over, right? I'm afraid I'm going to get a ticket, but I've never had to be afraid for my life. So that awareness that people's experiences, people of color, minorities, and people of color's experiences for very mundane things or things that I consider very mundane can be very different, can be very frightening. And I mean, I had no idea, right? So what brings a lot of that into light is the coverage of the police interactions with people of color, and it's extremely alarming. And for people that you would think that, hey, I should be able to call this person and feel safe and they're going to take care of things, and it's the completely opposite for minorities and people of color, right? If the police get called on you, there's a very good chance that you're going to have a very, very negative, perhaps hostile, perhaps deadly experience. And having never had to worry about that or not even think about that, it's been really eye opening. And that's why for the little bit that I feel I can do, like go out there and say, hey, my friend's Corey, my best friend Julian, he's half black, half Hispanic. You guys, you're my friends, you're my family, you're my brothers. I don't know what I can do to support you, but let me know what I can do and I'll be there. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like so, we appreciate the support. We appreciate normalcy too, because like I said, because it's weird, and this is kind of segues into my next question is that as I've transitioned from like Michigan to Georgia and California and all these different places, I noticed that the dynamic with certain people is just very peculiar because it's like when people get around me, they feel like they have to talk a certain way or act a certain way or they're judging me, and I'm just like, why not just have
Mhm.
a regular conversation? Like, and that's what it reminded me of the interview thing is because I'm like, well, me and Matt, the way we talk is pretty normal. The way I talk to certain other people is normal. So I'm like, why doesn't everybody do that same thing? And that's what kind of prompted me to start these conversations as well. So, but as you transition, I know from Michigan to California and other places around the U.S., have you noticed there's a different dynamic toward to people's attitudes and things like that?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, right? Like, so I grew up in Michigan, in the northern part of Michigan, where I don't remember ever seeing people of color. I mean, there were like the people that own the Chinese, restaurant, and so if you want to call that people of color, I guess you could. But I don't remember seeing, black people, African American people growing up.
Mhm.
I We used to like go door to door, doing um, fundraising for church and stuff like that and selling devotional books. I remember the first door I knocked on as a kid, and a black lady, African American lady, answered the door, and I was like, "Oh, she lives in our town," So um, I guess I guess um, I never really experienced a whole lot of racism towards black people growing up because there just weren't any, right? And I went away to high school to a boarding school, and all the black kids that went there, African American kids that went there, um, they just kind of hung out with each other, right? And there was like one or two, white kids they would hang out with, but they were kind of like their own deal, and you kind of knew not to mess with them. And I was like, hey, that's okay. I didn't never had a problem with anybody,
Mhm.
but it's I've never really thought, hey, I should act differently toward these people. I don't know where that comes from. I guess it's just because I'm not trying to act, quote unquote, if I can say that. I'm not trying to talk a different way or act a different way or dress a different way
Yeah.
when I'm interacting with people of color because I'm who I am, right? I'm not trying to emulate you. What is that? Uh, Imitation is the highest form of flattery,
Yeah.
right? Like if you if you came to work when I met you and you were wearing like Lakers gear and your shorts were hanging half down or something, one of those stereotypes, I wouldn't be like, hey, I want to make friends with that guy, so I'm going to do the same thing, right?
Right.
That's that to me would be like really disingenuous, So I'm gonna meet you where you're at with who I am, and that's kind of the way I've always been. So.
Hmm. I thought maybe people who have not grown up towards, near major cities, maybe they've got some kind of like stigma or something like that. But with you, it's just the opposite. So you didn't grow up around black people, but yet you didn't have this like prejudgmental kind of thing. So that that's actually really cool. I'm happy that you are normal essentially. But yeah, the reason I was analyzing it because I thought, well, there's so many racist people, this, that, and the other. Maybe it's because they've never interacted in the major cities with multiple cultures. Maybe they just have this thing. But I don't know. Maybe that myth just kind of got shattered with what you said. So maybe it's just them. I don't know.
Well, and that's one person's experience, right? I didn't grow up learning to, hey, treat people who are African American differently because they're African American.
Hmm.
And I don't know how many people share that experience. I mean, yes, of course, we look different, right? Our skin is a different color, but
Sure.
to me, that was never, um, whether explicitly or implicitly, hey, treat those people differently because they look different than you. And that wasn't just a black and white thing. That's anybody, Hispanic, Asian. It was just kind of people aren't different because they look different, right?
Hmm.
And I've always really enjoyed, making friends with people from different cultures, and usually that means they're different skin color or different races and ethnicities, because they're so different from what I grew up with, right? I can White people are a dime a dozen, right? I can I can I can throw a stone and hit five white friends, but people who look different than me and have grown up in different countries and had different experiences and grown up with something that, was normal to them was so completely foreign and alien to me is just really interesting. And I've always really enjoyed that. Now, you and I think we grew up in a probably pretty similar, we grew up in Michigan, probably had a lot of similar experiences culturally growing up. But,
Hmm.
I think that probably that Michigan thing was what connected us.
Yep.
And, we had that thread in common, and then we just built off from that. And, here we are 12 years later, we don't see you very often, but I still consider you a good friend. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And what, like I know that you are married to someone who's minority. Have you guys had any strange racial experiences or anything like that, as far as like when you're going out on dates or just anything in general? Have you guys ever experienced anything just out of the ordinary as far as racism?
I wouldn't say not in a negative way, right? Like, so my wife, both her parents are of Latin descent. They're both of Mexican descent.
Hmm.
And for the most part, people, I remember when my brother first met her, he was like, I can tell she's something, right? And he meant like not white. He's like, is she Italian? Is she like Middle Eastern? And so it's been a lot more of that kind of thing. My wife
Okay.
doesn't look blatantly Hispanic. She's not really dark complected. I don't know. I don't want to start playing into a bunch of stereotypes of what Latin people look like, right? Because
Yeah.
their appearances are just as diverse as black people and white people. So,
Yeah, sure.
um, but not in a bad way, right? Like, um, just in kind of people trying to figure out where she's from, and she gets this from all kinds of people. She's traveled, for internationally multiple times for work, and people are always trying to guess, are you Middle Eastern? So it's usually just that they're trying to figure out, hey, where are you from? Where is your country of origin? Is as she likes to say. So, but
That's-
never any like in my experience, I can't think of anything negative. I mean, she gets more grief from her friends about her height because she's barely 5 feet than she does anything racial or ethnic. So,
yeah, yeah. That's a good point too. I've got a buddy who's from Salvador, and he's pretty much my complexion. And I know your
mhm.
wife is like more light skinned. So yeah, I guess you're right. It's kind of a variation of different shades of brown, pretty much, that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
as far as and I think we touch on it again as far as where you grew up and things like that, not pertaining to you or your family and friends, but have you noticed, whether it's in Michigan or in other places, there seems to be, well, at least in my opinion, there seems to be a lot of fear towards minorities, black, white, or black, Latino, whatever. Have you noticed that, like with certain, I guess, neighboring or white people and stuff like that? If there's like this fear thing going on, because I've been trying to analyze where that comes from, what that's about, but it just seems like there's a lot of fear toward minorities. Do you have any thoughts on that as far as why that might be?
That's that. I've thought about that a little bit too, and I think part of that might be like geographical. And let me explain what I mean by that, right? Like, we've already talked about my experience growing up in that, I wasn't thought to treat people differently based on their skin color or the way they looked. But I mean, if I was in a bad part of, for example, say downtown Detroit, right? I'm from Michigan. We're from Michigan, so we can talk about this, right? This is well known, right?
Yeah.
There are certain parts of Detroit. Eminem sings about it prolifically about 8 Mile Road, right? Where if you're a Caucasian person, you have no business being there, right? So so if I were in that place, would I be afraid at the wrong time? Or I don't know what that wrong time would be, right? Maybe there is no good time.
Hmm.
Um, but would I be afraid? I probably should be if I'm not. If I'm smart enough, right? I probably should be afraid. The same thing, any big city you go to, there's probably certain areas where, hey, this is a dangerous place for you to be. Is it more dangerous for you to be a white person than a black person? Like there's South Side of Chicago, there's gun violence all the time. A lot of people hit by bullets are completely unintended victims, right? A
Hmm.
bullet goes straight, it hits a little kid. Now, just because that neighborhood is mostly African American people, it hits an African American kid. Um, but like the things I see about this lady, there was what are they termed these people Karens, right? You've heard this term.
Yeah.
These
Correct.
entitled ladies who have this fear, and you're like, I think that might be what you're talking about. Like, where does that come from? I don't know. I don't know if that's fear or just racial bias, right?
Hmm.
And they're trying to harass people. because they feel entitled because of the current political climate. I think that has a lot to do with it, right? I
Yeah,
think somebody very high in the government has made it very clear about their racial profiling and tendencies and what they consider acceptable behavior. And it has just entitled the worst behavior out of these people, whether it be race or politics. And I think that has made it okay for them to take things they usually kept kind of closeted. They'd keep it under the rug.
sure.
They're like, well, I'm going to let that flag fly now, right? I've
Hmm.
been given this example by our, the leader of our country to be like, hey, go ahead and air that stuff out. Let people know, that you're a bigot and that you're a racist or you're xenophobic.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as is it a fear? Is it a just your bigotry or maybe the two walk hand in hand. I can't really speak to it intelligently because I don't own that, right?
Sure, sure.
So
Yeah. No, and that's a good point. Like I said, I know for me, I look around and like I've had, I remember going to an herb shop and I was standing in line to get just like some, what do you call it? Like natural, they're like natural supplements, like vitamins and things like that. So it's basically stuff you can get at Whole Foods now. But so I'm in this
mhm.
shop and I'm buying something. I think it was just like a men's daily vitamin or something like that. But I remember the lady behind or in front of me. It was she was white and she kept looking back at me like, and she looked panicked, and I couldn't. I didn't dawn on me at first. I was just like, why is she looking like that? So I'm like on my phone. I look back up, and she's still kind of doing this, and I'm like, and I started looking behind me. I'm like, what's going on with her? So, and then finally she like
Are
snatched.
you okay?
Yeah, exactly. So she grabbed her purse and was like clenching her purse, and I'm just like, and I was like, well, why did she look so panicked? It didn't dawn on me like, oh, it might have been a racial thing. So, just seeing the fear in her eyes, I'm just like, why are you that afraid? I'm like, what do you think is gonna happen here? Like, relax. So
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, so that's a good example, I guess. Yep. Let's
Do
see.
you have a lot of scenarios, or is that more unusual for you?
No, I'm kind of naive, and then I'll explain why. For the last 20 something years, I've had racial experience after racial experience after racist experience. But in all honesty, it takes me a minute to catch on to it because I'm not actively looking for it. I'm not looking for, hey, this person might be racist. I'm just kind of like la 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 la, and I'm kind of being naive about it. But then all of a sudden I'll say like, oh, why is this person cussing at me, or why is this person angry at me? And I'm like, oh wait, okay, it's racism. So I don't even catch on to it because I'm not actively looking for it. But when it does happen, I'm just like, and I've jotted down about 10 different scenarios I've had in my life, and they're pretty obvious. I mean, people calling me boy or using the N word and things like that. So
Hmm.
it's like, okay.
Yeah.
And up until that point, before they used the derogatory term, I was just like, why does this guy have beef with me? Or why is she so upset with me? I don't understand what I did. But then all of a sudden they'll use a racial, term. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So
Ah,
you're an idiot. Okay. All right. I got it now. So that kind of thing.
I would guess, if I had to guess, I would say, I mean, you said you documented 10 times. I would guess that a lot of people of color, a lot of African Americans probably have a lot more than that. Wouldn't you think?
I think so. I think so because I jotted down 10 off the top of my head, but if I really delve into it, there's probably more like 15 to 20 or something like that. But yeah, I would say so as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Similar to what we were just talking about, why do you think people have so much hatred towards other races and other people? Is it a culture thing? Is it how you're raised? Is it like what do you think it is exactly?
I think a lot of it is the example that we're given by it being brought up, right? I don't know how much. I think I think it's a learned behavior, right? I don't think anybody comes out of the womb thinking, "Oh, this color of skin is good and this color of skin is bad." It's the example set to us by our parents and our community, our neighborhood, our family. So, I think my impression is that's the reason why it was never really an issue for me because it just wasn't there. right?
Hmm.
If I was brought up in a town, if I was more in like the Detroit area, Lansing, Grand Rapids, where there was a lot more ethnic diversity, there probably would have been early signals, early, probably mostly nonverbal cues, right? About how people react, or crossing the street, or walking on the far side of the sidewalk when someone else walks by. All those little things are things that feed your brain. You notice these social cues, and since I never had them, I just, okay, there goes another person, right? So it's kind of like I grew up. What's the best way to say this? Like skin color agnostic, you know, which I don't think is the experience for most people. I'm probably, maybe people from small towns and, where there isn't much ethnic diversity have that same experience, or could relate to that. But
Hmm.
I think I'm fortunate to have taken it in that vein, right?
Yeah.
Like, why should I treat someone different, right? I never learned that was how they should be treated just because they look different than me.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, and I remember I'm reminded as well that you were talking about Detroit. A friend of mine, we were driving through Detroit. It was can't remember when we were like back in high school or something like that, but I remember we were driving on 94. We got off on 75, which is like dead
Mhm.
center in the middle of Detroit. We get off the exit and it was around Russell Street. And I'm looking around all these abandoned buildings and old factories. I'm just like, yeah, we should probably hurry up and leave right now because something is not looking nice around
Right.
here.
So that was the cue that this is not a good place to be. Not, hey, my skin color, I have the wrong skin color to be here. This is not a safe place to be for anybody's skin color. Right.
Well, yeah, but I was gonna say at the same time though too, what we're talking about is just how you're raised and the environment, that kind of thing. Same thing
Mhm.
though when I'm down in Georgia, if I'm driving around somewhere and I see a bunch of Confederate flags, I'm like, okay, we should probably leave because it's like I don't feel safe here. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I
no,
could
I think
see
you're
that.
right. It's like me being a black man in rural Georgia with a bunch of Confederate people, I'm probably not going to be safer. In the same light, you driving through Detroit, being a white man, you're probably not going to be as safe either. So I think
Right.
there's like a balanced environment. Like if you're raised in like a neighborhood that's not too rural or not too harsh to the city, you have a like kind of a balance here, which is kind of how I grew up, and that's I think the advantage I have knowing black people and white people and just kind of having that balance. I think that's what really does it. Because to me, in my opinion, I think there's a lot of things going on, like you said, that are hidden and behind closed doors. And the farther out you go, or the deeper into the city you go, and how you're raised and that kind of thing. I think all that's factoring into the way people act because I've never seen just, outside of the balancing thing I'm talking about, where you're not too far, not too far either way. Every time the majority of people I know that are really rural or really in the city are like the same, like very similar as far as attitudes, things like that. And I think ultimately that's kind of what drives a lot of racism because you've got these two major groups that don't really cohabitate or interact. And I think because they live in their own worlds, they think, oh, this is the bad guy and this is the bad guy. And it's like, no,
Mhm.
everybody's pretty much the same. We all have red blood, we all have eyes and ears, So I think that's what's basically missing in the mix of everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
I would
unfortunate.
agree.
Yeah. Um, why do you think people are debating racism? Like, shouldn't it be pretty clear what racism is? I'm often reminded of people that say, like we saw an interview the other day where a lady's husband's using the N word and they're using derogatory statements. But they said, but we're not racist. It's like, huh? It's like, okay, all right, if you say so, you know. So
I would like to have seen that interview, and I think those people probably bring a very unique perspective to the table, right? So what that says to me, just in that little bit of what you said, what that says to me is those people identify the word racist as a bad thing, right? They, however, do not recognize the use of the N word as being a racist word or being derogatory in a racist way, right?
yep.
Um, and that's probably a very unique perspective. It's not a mainstream perspective, right? Like I remember growing up, my dad would use it on very rare occasions. He wasn't talking about people of color very often or African American people, but I
Mm-hmm.
remember he referred to Brazil nuts, and he would use the N word and said toes. That was like the nickname for these Brazil nuts. You know, you get a thing of the mixed nuts,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, wait, what? It took me
Like,
a while to
what?
like. So wait a minute, you're because he wasn't using it. Now here I am, a white person saying my dad wasn't using the N word in a racist way, but clearly he was. He thought these Brazil nuts looked like the toes of a black person. Now he didn't come
Oh,
up with that
okay.
name, right?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't come up with that name. He didn't coin it, but he heard it and he perpetuated it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably one example of somebody who's using a word that is clearly racist and clearly has a terrible history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they're using it in a way that they don't consider racist, right? So
Okay.
those
Yeah.
people in that interview, I didn't see the interview, but I'm guessing, right? I'm kind of hypothesizing here about where they're coming from with that, and it might be something as, I could say it's very inane that my dad referred to a certain kind of nut the way that he did,
Mm-hmm.
but clearly to people who are African American, they'd be like, that's extremely offensive, right?
Yeah.
We don't take like what are those cookies that go into tiramisu, lady fingers. Okay, they don't say we don't call these white fingers, or we don't call these cracker fingers or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it, it's it's how that language has kind of built itself into our lexicon, built itself into our in certain people's society and their culture, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to go away, right? I mean, I hope it does, but it only goes away by us educating
Not
people. Hey,
soon.
that's not okay. No matter what the context you use that word in, whether it's a racial epithet describing Asian American people, African American people, it's not okay to use that in describing anything,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's offensive to that group.
Yeah, and I think the key too is, like you said, there is kind of an ignorance and things like that. I think the key
Oh,
is
absolutely.
education, because when I was in high school and in my early 20s, I used to use the N word with the A on the end, like like the hip hop version of it. So I would say that all the time, like thinking it's cool. But then when you really start looking at the history of the word and where it comes from, and doing research on racism and everything that's happened over the last 400 years, when you really start diving into the history of it, the funny, cute nickname all of a sudden is like, oh, wow, this is really disturbing. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's why I think, like you said, education is key to it, because I don't use the word in any form now, whether it's ERA, I just say N word if I'm referring to that. But
Right.
I don't like the word at all. And I don't like the hip hop version of it. I don't like it. So I don't use any of it, just knowing the dark history of it. So
Yeah.
education wise, when you talk about, just the history of it, just like, like if you looked up like the Tuskegee experiment and slavery, like there's a long list of things that I could give like your dad and other people, just like, hey, you might want to check this out before you check out, just before you rattle off those words, because there's some really evil, morbid stuff behind the history of it.
So much of that is white people don't know about it, right? Not much of that history of what happened to African American people after slavery was abolished. It's not like everything was, sunshine and roses, right? There was still a terribly long, difficult struggle. There was that, and I'm just learning about a lot of this myself now because of this movement, right?
Hmm.
Um, my wife's maid of honor at our wedding is African American. Her husband's African American, and Keith is his name. He's been posting a bunch of stuff that I've been like, I'm really enjoying that he's posting this, not because it's good. It's a good story. They're terrible, atrocious stories
Hmm.
of terrible things that happened to people of color after slavery was abolished, and even into like the mid 20th century. There's that thing that happened in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, the
I
Black
again,
Wall Street Massacre. Yep.
yes, exactly. That I had no idea that existed, right? But it
Hmm.
was a terrible massacre, and these massacres have occurred all over in places in the South. Probably much less so in the North, but probably very prominent in the South. And for the most part, I don't know about them, right?
Sure.
So part of my quest now is to just become more educated on this to, I mean, I can't change any of it, but I can educate myself about it and let other people know, hey, this is probably stuff that you're not aware of because it's not mainstream. It's
Yeah.
been kind of swept under the rug because the people in power at the time realized, oh, yeah, that was really bad. We
Hmm.
shouldn't have done. So we're just going to go ahead and hide that part of history because we don't want people knowing how awful we were.
Yeah, yeah, that's what's most disturbing to me as well, because my mother told me that she didn't know about some of the stuff because they never taught her these things in the history books. Before the internet, my mom is in her 70s now, so before the internet, she never learned about African American history. So when my brother and I were growing up, we started having the homework assignments and things like that. So my mother was not aware of all the inventors that were black and all the tragedies that have happened, like Black Wall Street. You got, I mean, Emmett Till, that's kind of one that's more obvious, more well known. The
Mhm.
Tuskegee experiments and just a lot of different things. And like you said, you get all this, like, for example, with the Confederate statues right now, I wasn't aware that they had some 4,000 monuments or something like that. I mean, including the statues. And it's like, why do they have all these up? And like you said, I think it's like the people who were in power before just kind of said, oh yeah, we'll praise the Confederate flags and worship these statues and sweep everything else under the rug. We're all good guys. And it's like, no, not really, So,
Right, right.
so yeah.
Yeah, I think my experience with growing up, learning about African American people in U.S. history was, Frederick Douglass, in the Civil War in high school, and before that in elementary school, which is really where all this should start. It was, George Washington Carver, and here's the 200 inventions that this incredibly intelligent man had to do with the peanut, right?
Hmm.
So, which if you think about, is pretty amazing considering the time that he lived in. 200 different inventions with a peanut. I look at a peanut, I see not very many things. This man came up with 200 inventions, 200 ways to
Hmm.
use a peanut, and it's incredible. But that was how limited my experience was, right? It wasn't until, and even in like world history and US history in high school, there wasn't anything. It was kind of in passing, right? You would learn about the good things. You would learn about Harriet Tubman, for 5 minutes, and then you had two questions on a test about Harriet Tubman, you know. But there is such an incredibly diverse, both good and bad, history for African Americans in the United States, and it deserves a lot more attention than we're giving it. And I think it's finally coming into the light, and I think it's going to be much more prominent going forward, which is a good thing, which is way, way, way decades overdue, right?
Hmm.
Because by learning about that history and learning about both the good things, the George Washington Carvers and the Harriet Tubmans, but also these terrible massacres, those are equally as important as celebrating the people of African American descent that have done amazing things. I think one of the first surgeons, here I go again with my uninformed, spouting off. One of the first
Okay.
surgeons, I think, in the U.S. was African American, right?
Hmm.
I think it was a
Yeah.
heart surgeon.
Yeah,
So
and I forgot his name, but I think it's Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, maybe. I don't know. I have to recheck, but I know who you're
here,
talking about. Yeah, yeah,
see, we both need to get ourselves more educated. Look at this,
exactly.
but not just the token, and we need more than just the token few African Americans that are showing up in history books written by white people, quite frankly, right?
Yeah,
Um, there's so much more that we could learn about, and we have to educate ourselves on both sides of the coin. Acknowledge the fantastic contributions, but also acknowledge the suffering and the pain and the massacres that African Americans have gone through in their quest to just be treated equal, right? Like, to
yeah,
use your term, to be treated normal, to just be treated like, hey, my skin, the color of my skin doesn't matter, right?
yeah.
What matters is the content of my character. So.
Yeah, and like I said, to me, it's like such bizarre behavior anyway, because to me, it's like even if I see somebody of a different race, I'm not going to have a automatic prejudged notion of who they are or what they do. And I'm definitely not going to go and like hate them just because they're a certain way. So racism has always been, and I've said it before on other interviews, racism has always been a very bizarre thing for me. I don't understand the logic or reasoning behind how you can hate someone so much to the point where you're trying to physically harm them or damage them emotionally with some, with their words and things like that. It's such a bizarre thing. I mean, even with the experiences I've had, I don't understand people's psyche that you would hate, because the worst one I had was like someone sent me a hate letter or something like that, and I'm just looking at this letter and I'm like, how do you have so much disdain for someone who is you never even met? It's like this is bizarre, you know? So
That would be.
anyway, yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's a very just very strange mentality toward that people have, I think.
Yeah, I can't explain that. I don't think I've ever been I've so passionately hated something, and this isn't about race, that I've decided to write a letter.
Yeah, exactly.
Like think about how committed to that emotion that you are to,
Yes.
in this case, from what it sounds like, a stranger somehow found out what your address was, said, "Here's how much I hate you, even though I don't really know you," right? Like that's a serious commitment to that emotion, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. I was telling a buddy of mine that, and I've said this on the other interviews as well. I the thought that I had when I saw the letter, a guy sent it to me in high school. He sent it to my high school, of all places.
Oh,
But what was bizarre about it is, like you said, the commitment to do it. I'm like, there's no way, I don't like cats, but there's no way I'm going to sit down and write a 5-page essay on why I hate cats and send it to like a cat owner. It's like, I don't have that kind of time. You know what I mean? So you have to
right.
be extremely committed, like you said, to really do something like that.
And if you look at these examples in social media of people doing that, that's exactly what they're doing. All these people that the media is dubbing Karens, right? They're
Hmm.
just walking along, going about their business. I'm thinking of this example of the white lady harassing the African American family in Oakland for having a picnic, right? They're
Oh,
barbecuing in the
yeah.
park
Hmm.
where you're supposed to barbecue. I'm sorry, but they provide the little metal stands with the grills and the grates. You bring your barbecue briquettes and you do have your picnic, right? Like
Yeah,
clearly,
exactly.
right? But she didn't go to the park. I don't know, maybe she did. I didn't think that she went to the park looking for people to harass. She just saw something on her way. Maybe she was going to the grocery store or going to drop off some mail and stopped and like totally got so committed, so passionate, right?
Hmm.
About her racism
Yeah.
that she stopped, interrupted her day to I don't remember the entire scenario. I think I don't know if she called the police or
I
if she
think,
just sat
yeah.
there. I think she did call the police, but she was sat there and spewed, all kinds of nastiness at them for a long time. But that's a real commitment, right? That's a deep seated, and I think these interviews that you're doing are a really good idea because if we can get to the root of, wow, where does that level of emotional commitment to racism come from, right? How did you get so fearful, or how did you get so angry?
Yeah.
Did something bad happen to you, right? Were
Hmm.
you accosted by an African American man when you were 5 years? I don't know, right? You would think it
Yeah.
would need to be something that severe for people to be so committed to that emotion.
Yeah.
And
No,
I,
absolutely.
I think a lot of cases, it's in my mind, it should be baseless, right? I don't think that people have been violently attacked or anything. I think it's just, you know, what they grew up with, and okay, it's normal to think like this.
Yeah, but you're right. Something triggered something, whether it's traumatic or just learned behavior from the parents or whatever. Something triggered this bizarre behavior that people have towards racism. It's got to be something. So,
And maybe it is fear. I think you mentioned that earlier when we were talking, because what else makes people respond so strongly, right?
mhm,
Like if I'm happy, yeah, I'm happy. I might not go and shout from the mountaintops about it. But if I'm afraid, right, I'm gonna react very strongly.
sure,
So I think you're onto something there. I think it must be some type of fear. You're tapping into people's fear. Racism and fear, I think, go hand in hand.
yeah, might be. How do we recover as a society? Is there a way for people to come back to make things better? How do we begin to mend everything that's broken right now? In your thoughts, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's that's a fantastic question, right?
Mhm.
I think for my opinion is you have to have the desire to want things to be better, right? So you're going to run into two classes of people: people that have the desire for things to get better, and people who are committed enough to that desire to follow it up with action, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of white people might be like, well, what can I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know I've said that to myself 100 times. The thing you can do is reach out and ask, hey, how can I help,
Mm-hmm.
right? If me being an interview with you helps, I'll do it, right? It costs me half an hour of my time. That's, in the grand scheme of things, it's not very much.
Mm-hmm.
If it's me just smiling and waving to a little African American boy walking down the street, right? So he doesn't feel threatened by, oh my goodness, there's another white person who's gonna like call me names or get mad at me or something just because of the color of my skin.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very small gesture, but it's something,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
Then you have the other side of the coin, right? The people who don't want things to change,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they have no desire to see things change, they want to propagate the status quo. I don't know what you can do about those people, right? Besides, if you're African American, you try to stay away from them, right? Because how are you going to change that mindset?
Yeah.
I think in our very politically charged climate right now, you have people where right leaning conservative republicanism and racism are very much walking hand in hand,
Yeah.
right? I think
Yeah.
the people who are right leaning Republicans who are not racist are having a very hard time being in that space right now, right?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily want to, align yourself with someone politically who has all these racial overtones and xenophobic overtones. And I think that's the right thing to do, right? You
Yeah.
can still adhere to your beliefs, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? Don't be like, hey, I guess I'm just going to have to swallow the racism if I want to associate myself with this group politically. Don't do that,
Yeah.
right? One of my favorite politicians, and I was just thinking about this, and I ordered a book on Amazon from him the other night. Is John McCain,
Yeah.
right? John
Okay.
McCain was like, you know what? Yes, and I remember hearing him say this was like, I'm going to vote for the party's nominee, right? And then once Trump became president, I'm going to go ahead and say his name. He stood up and was like, no, this is not okay.
Yeah.
Right? I know you're saying this is what Republicans want, but that's not okay. I'm not going to just go along with everybody else and jump on the bandwagon because my conscience dictates that I not do that. It's not the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we need more people who are going to be brave like that, right?
Yeah. Definitely. I
So,
agree. And that's the thing. Like,
and I think it's very rare, right? If you look in, especially in our politics, almost everybody's jumped on the bandwagon, and it's
yeah.
very few and far between people who have said, I'm going to stand up for what I believe in, and I'm not just going to jump on the bandwagon. But we need a lot more of that.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, definitely. And I would say the thing we touched on before too, if the one piece of advice I would say is just, I mean, you're a pretty normal person, so it's easy to talk through things like that. But I would just say, just educate people. Just like if somebody ever rattles off something that's like racist or weird, just say, hey, have you done your research on what's happened for the last 400 years? Have you done some research? Have you seen the Tulsa massacres? Have you researched slavery and how it was done? So before, I mean, I would just educate people to say, hey, before you make this judgment against this black person or this Latino person, you might want to do your history on why you think you hate this person and what's really going on. Because I think that if if you're right, and if what we're saying is right, if you're not ignorant and you know what's happening and you know the evil history of everything, then it may spark you to be like, oh wow, this is eye opening and this is really disturbing, and it may change your mind. But if you're just flat out racist and a moron, then it won't change anything. But at least you give the person the chance to say, hey, you need to do some research before you start making all these prejudice statements.
Yeah. The kind way to say that is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Mhm.
The unkind way to say that is you can't fix stupid. So
Exactly.
is that some people are perfectly happy and content with where they are and they don't want to change,
Yeah.
right? To a lot of people, change is scary. And well, what does that mean? What is it going to look like? I don't know. Well, what do you think it means if you just start treating people as people instead of treating somebody different based on the color of their skin? How is that going to be bad for you?
Yeah.
You know?
Thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, we appreciate the time, man.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Corey. Good luck with this. I hope it goes really well.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the videos. Please feel free to like and subscribe at the bottom. And please leave your comments. We want to hear from you. We want to hear about ways of reconciliation. But we also want to hear about subject matter you want to talk about on the show. So give us a shout, like, subscribe, comment.